What didn't work out with other true?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a fair question. And I would like to say this, that I am a huge fan of Kirk's. Obviously, the timing for college football in general, specifically for the Big Ten, was challenging with our season being canceled, with COVID. It was a very unique time for all of us. So some of the things that Kirk had to deal with were outside of his control. When you're hiring a new offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, and you really don't have we had no spring ball. Right now we have some variation in the rules changes of like OTAs where we're able to meet with and be with our players more than ever. He got none of that. So I think that's the best way I could describe some of the challenges and issues that had nothing to do with Kirk. And I'm a big fan. I was really glad we were in Detroit sometime this year. It all kind of, and I got a chance to see Kirk, and he walked up and we had a really good conversation. I just got a ton of respect for him as a professional. I got a ton of respect for him as a man, and I wish him nothing but the best and success. I can understand why PJ brought him back. He obviously did a great job for them. I'm going to be rooting for him and his family every game but one. But I got nothing but great things to say about Kirk, and a lot of the things that played out were outside of his control.
What's the process for the whiteout game, picking that game, and how did it become Minnesota this year?
Yeah. So for us, our whiteout game has typically been a night game. With the fireworks and the white T-shirts and clothing on the backdrop of the black sky, and it's pretty special. Although the 12 o'clock games, if you look at the ratings in the Big Ten, have done unbelievably well, and I think it's been an ingenious approach. In terms of starting out college football Saturdays with a primetime game, we did a very simple kind of poll with our fans on social media. We didn't talk about specific games or teams, but we just said, for the whiteout, what's important to you? Night game, afternoon, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Is it the opponent that matters most? So we kind of did this. We mixed it in there with, like, what's your favorite thing, the hamburger or the hot dog at the stadium? We kind of started out with those things to try to act like we cared whether it was a hot dog or not. It was really, we were just setting it up to get to the whiteout question. But the data said that most people want a night game. So when we looked at our schedule, the game that we thought had the best chance to be a night game, another game we had seen was probably going to be a 12 o'clock game. That impacted the decision, and that's where I was leaning. The fans backed that up, and then when Pat came in, I asked him, and right away he thought the same thing. So that's why the choice was made. And then the other thing is, there's some things from a scheduling perspective in the Big Ten where the way it currently sits is we can't have night games after a certain point on the schedule, so that limits it as well. And then also, if you want all the fans to dress up in white, that becomes more difficult later in the season when people want to wear their hunting gear to stay warm, if that makes sense. So a lot of factors that went into it. I think it's also maybe caught people a little bit off guard because the way the schedule fell up to that point, it had pretty much rotated between two opponents. So it kind of set up an expectation, but that's really just kind of how it played out, if that's fair.
You've been Pat a couple times, obviously being a night guy. What's been your impression of him so far? What do you like about what he's done?
I love his energy. I love his passion. I love his competitive drive. It's not the end-all, be-all that he's a football guy, but the fact that he played football in the Big Ten, I think, just allows him to have a perspective or a lens on our game, on our conference, and of Penn State that I think is valuable. I think, again, with me being a football guy and the football coach, there's things that I go to him about or we have discussions about, and we're aligned already without him having to convince me and me having to convince him, if that makes sense. So I think there's a lot of from an efficiency standpoint, there's a lot of time that's saved that way. So I think that's been really valuable. And I think the other thing is having somebody who's a fighter. And everybody needs that across every campus and in every aspect. And again, I want this to come off specifically to Pat, because total respect for the regime that we had previously, but Pat's fighting some battles that maybe hadn't been fought in the past. Just like the provost is fighting battles that's in the best interest of the university, from an academic perspective, and just like the dean of the education school's got to fight their battles, and I think that's been apparent so far. Like I don't know if you were standing here when I said it. Chris Peterson's showing me, some of the tweets that have gone out already that Pat's saying that in years past I had to say, and I'm like, good. Well, he made a comment, I think, about NIL. And he made another comment.
Opening on the road in the Big Ten.
Yeah, about how Penn State, interesting, has opened 9 straight years on the road in the Big Ten. Last year at Wisconsin, this year at Purdue. And that's happened for 9 years. Like, I don't know how that's statistically even possible. Especially when it's been brought up before. But Pat's pounding that drum. So like in years past, I would feel like I'd have to maybe say some of these things to maybe create some pressure or to create some dialogue that needed to happen. I don't have to. You can come talk to me about the left guard right now. I'm jacked about talking about the left guard and having somebody else pound the drum on the importance of NIL.
How much does that take the pressure off you, not even in just situations like this, but to not be having to think about it as much, or sort of the big picture athletic part?
Well, I think it obviously allows our focus as a football program to be on the things that you would say are most important. But the challenge is, if you're also not fighting for those things, it's hard to sustain your program or build your program, because if you're just laser focused on this, but your program is not growing in these other areas, then it's going to be hard to do that. So that is extremely, extremely valuable. And the other thing is, I just think when you're coming out saying these things all the time, and you're the one pounding the drum, it also puts you in position to be taking shots that you don't need to be taking. And it also can come off possibly like an excuse. So having somebody else be able to drive those messages is been very valuable, and I'm very appreciative.
Is there also some value in the fact that he's a little bit of an outsider here? So he's been an AD in a couple other places that he doesn't necessarily have. Is it almost good in some ways that he doesn't have Penn State experience, that he's sort of bringing a lot of perspectives from outside?
Well, I think, again, the people that have covered Penn State closely for a long time know that I've always said one of the greatest strengths of Penn State is people come, they fall in love with it, they never leave. One of our weaknesses is people come to Penn State, they fall in love with it and never leave. So a lot of times, like a lot of the people here that maybe represent other universities or cover other universities, I say, we're all proud, right? We're all so proud of our institutions and our history and our traditions, but if you're not studying best practice and what's really going on, it's easy to just say, well, we're the best at this, and that's really not the truth. So I think your point is a good one. That outside lens of seeing other things and seeing other places is valuable. But again, you got to do it in a respectful way, because you got to still embrace and respect the tradition and the history that's there, but not hold on to that so tightly that you don't continue to grow and evolve as an organization as well.
James, do you think, I was talking to Jair, and he was talking about the incoming class, you mentioned it on the podium. He said they're so prepared now, physically ready to maybe play right away. Do you feel like this is the most prepared group, whether it's the transfer portal or where it's just the true freshmen or the January enrollees? Is this the most prepared group physically and mentally ready to maybe compete right away that you've had at Penn State, and why do you think that is?
It feels that way, but again, until I get out at practice and you guys come to our weekly press conference, it's hard to say that right now. But yes, it feels that way. You look at the strength numbers, you look at the speed numbers, you look at the size. You look at a Nick Singleton, he doesn't look like a freshman. He's 220 pounds, ran really fast, power cleaned a lot. You look at Denai's 255 pounds right now, benched I think 405. So there just seems to be more of those guys. But again, in the weight room and running around shorts and t-shirts, I said underwear, I really meant shorts, just to be clear to everybody. That's very different than when the pads come on.
Right.
So I'll have a better idea, but just in terms of testing numbers and size and those things. And then again, it's different because now with the new rule changes and us allowed to be able to spend more football time with them in the summer and the off season, that's helped as well. But it's funny because we were talking about this at dinner last night. Tig's high school experience is very different than PJ's. So PJ doesn't feel that way as much as Tig because of just their backgrounds and where they came from.
Thanks for doing this. I've interviewed all three of your guys. Great guys. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
You guys have brought here. It's always a pleasure. You always bring such good guys to this and that.
Thank you, sir.
What's it like for you this summer? These three guys are obviously in Division II, but I'm sure there's other guys that really kind of stood out this summer. Is there some guys that you want to acknowledge that have been really there and you're excited for the season besides these three guys?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I typically don't like to answer that because what's going to happen is there's a bunch, and I'm going to forget someone, and their feelings are going to be hurt, or their parents are going to be upset. And right now, what I've talked about all day is we have more depth and more competition than we've had the last couple of years. So there's a lot of those guys right now. I think you look at, for example, last year we sustained some injuries. And last year, the injuries that we sustained happened to be at positions that we did not have the proven experience depth that we do this year. So you lose PJ Mustafa, and his backup had not played a lot of football in the Big Ten. It's a significant drop off, and we weren't able to overcome that. When you lose your starting quarterback in the same game and the backup quarterback had not had significant reps. So I just think we have more of that right now. There's still a few question marks like everybody in the country has. And we got to resolve them as quickly as we possibly can. But we seem to have either less questions this year than we did last year, or where we do have questions, we have more legitimate possibilities as answers behind them. Yeah, PJ, the people that cover our program closely, he's a special guy. I would hire him. When he gets done playing, I'd hire him to do a lot of different things, depending on what he wants to do. He's just that type of guy. He's raised right. His parents are phenomenal. He comes from a football family. His dad played at West Virginia. His brother plays for the Chicago Bears. Came from a great high school program at McDonough High School in Baltimore. We have a number of players from that school. And when you get a kid, that ball is really important to him. They're high production, low maintenance. He's already graduated. not only was raised the right way from a home training perspective, was also raised the right way in football and came from a really good high school program. The more guys you have like that, the better. The other thing I like about him is a lot of leaders in today's game as players, they want to lead by example. And they're not really into calling their teammates out. PJ is willing and is respected enough that he can do that with anybody. And because of the success he's had and the way he's gone about his business and the way he works, he can do that with anybody in the program and is willing to do it and isn't worried about hurting feelings.
Hey, Coach.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Coach. Speaking of PJ.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
How proud are you that PJ passed his conditioning test?
I'll tell you what. There's some of the more impressive things that are coming together right now. The size of the steak, the size of the 2 lobster tails, the pound of potatoes, the way he made me feel uncomfortable trying to finish my own steak because I thought he was going to take that, and the fact that he passed the conditioning test coming off a significant injury where a lot of guys that I've seen, when they have a significant injury, they may use that as a reason to have a modified conditioning test. And here's a guy that said, okay, I know there's some things that I need to accomplish both physically and mentally to check all the boxes to be prepared against Purdue. And one of them is pass the conditioning test that I passed as a freshman at 285 pounds, that now I'm passing as a 5th-year senior at 320 pounds before the steak and the lobster. And he does it and takes great pride in it and has fun with it. So it's interesting. We were talking last night at dinner, and he kept saying it to the waiter, he said it to Pat, he said it to me, and that was going to be his deal with everybody he talked to. That was going to be his answer for everything. And I passed the conditioning test. But to me, that it's an example of one of the lessons that we think is really important in our program is you're going to work hard in this program and you're going to work hard the rest of your life. You might as well have fun and a great attitude while you're doing it. And he's a great example of that. The conditioning test for you is very different than a conditioning test for that man based on body types and how his career has gone. So it's a good question and we're having fun with it, but I also want to get the point across how proud I am of him, how proud I am of you, and Sean, and our locker room, and our team.
Thank you, Coach.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
James, what excites you about adding USC and UCLA?
Yeah, I will say this, I'm somewhat of a traditionalist when it comes to college football and the regionality that it used to be. I still feel myself wanting that. But again, I also understand that, like I've said, college football has changed dramatically. And you better be changing with it. As a conference, as a school, as an AD, as a head football coach, you better be embracing the change because it's changing whether you want it to or not. And obviously some other conferences made some decisions, and it put us in a position where we needed to as well. So, obviously when you're able to get 2 universities that are respected not only athletically but also aligned with the Big Ten from an academic perspective, that's, I think, really valuable because at the end of the day, Penn State is a university, and I think the Big Ten as a conference isn't a conference that is a winning at all cost conference. We still want to make sure that our student athletes have a well-rounded experience, and we want to make sure that our universities are well-rounded. So being really strategic about who we bring in, I think, is important. So I am embracing it for all those reasons, and I think there's going to be a lot of attention and a lot of excitement about some games that maybe our fans and our alumni and our lettermen aren't able to see or haven't been able to see as often as a Penn State versus USC or a Penn State versus UCLA. I hope as many of those games are at home as possible, but I think it's a good thing for our conference, and it makes sense in the current landscape of college football.
James, what was different about playing against Michigan last year compared to a lot of these other years that you've gone up against them?
I'm sorry?
What was different about facing Michigan last year compared to some of the other years that you've gone up against them?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We've had great games year in and year out against Michigan. A lot of them have been one possession games. Obviously, going there is a tough place to play, and coming our place is a tough place to play. But obviously, they were able to do it consistently. I think that's the challenge in our conference, right? Especially on our side of the conference, in our division. You got to be able to do it week in and week out, and at a consistent level. I think if you had to say what was the biggest differentiator, the defensive ends. When you have guys like that change the game plan significantly. When you have two guys that can rush the passer and be disruptive like they were able to be all season long, that was one of many, but probably the thing that stood out to me the most.
Thank you.